following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners on Saga 960 AM and those listening around the world on streaming and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I'm not a therapist, but I am your source for practical advice for everyday problems using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. This episode, we're going to talk about people pleasing. When it's good, when it's bad, and how to balance it out. Our guest this week is clinical psychologist Liana to talk about just how to do that. But before we get to her, let's talk about what people pleasing is. If you've got a question inspired by this show, give me a call, 289-275-9600. That's 289-275-9600. Or email me, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. That's Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Or if you have trouble spelling my name, you can fill out the contact form on nottherapyshow.com or send me a tweet, send me an Insta at nottherapyshow. Okay. Do you habitually agree with whoever's right in front of you? Do you apologize for things that aren't your fault? Do you have trouble saying no, even when you know that you should? Do you change your behavior or attitudes depending on who's around? Or do you base your worth on the opinions of others? Okay, this is kind of a trick series of questions. We all do one of those things some of the time. That's what makes finding the line on people pleasing so difficult. If we don't people please at all, we get into trouble. But if we people please too much, we also get into trouble. We've all had a difficult boss, a narcissistic relative, an impossible to please client, or even a frenemy that we people please around. Just because it's the path of least resistance. In those instances, people pleasing can be a necessary evil, and some people, like me, struggle with it more than others. I have a very low threshold for this sort of people pleasing, in part because of the specifics of the trauma condition that I manage, but also because it has always just felt fake. With a boss or a client, I can kind of sort of justify the fakeness, right? I usually start planning an exit strategy, but I get through. But with personal relationships, generally dealing with people, nope. What you see with me is what you get. Other than censoring myself to comply with broadcast codes, I get the point of easing off the potty mouth for radio. But you have no idea how much trouble being allergic to people pleasing has caused me. So I get why some people please. People are really awful when you don't. I got slaughtered when I first started working in media. I got blamed for everything because I was the person who was easiest to blame. It's not that I was mean to anyone. I was just honest when I didn't think a deadline was reasonable or when I thought, something amounted to harassment in the workplace. Pre-Me Too, that was not something you said in Canadian television. So I had to emulate people pleasing, and it was terrible. I was a case study in a lack of self-care, built-up resentment, and an inability to enjoy myself. And I ended up breaking down and getting sick, which is what happens. And it was the strangest thing to realize that I was completely aware of what was going on and what it was doing to me. I just didn't think I had any other choice. Now, that's completely different than doing something nice for someone because you want to. I love doing nice things just because I want to. But when you feel forced to, it's not a nice thing, is it? It's an indication that something's wrong. Now, chronic people pleasers often don't consciously realize that problem. They're replicating patterns they saw in their families or peer groups, or they're maintaining expectations that were set in early life. And of course, there's that stubborn gendered expectations thing that nobody likes talking about. People are stiffening up right now, right? But plenty of people quietly grumble about it from one perspective or another. A male relative's wife was in the hospital recently, and a whole bunch of people made sure he had enough food and company while his wife was ill. My mother remarked while that was going on that if it had been the husband in the hospital instead of the wife, the outpouring probably wouldn't have been so great because women are more expected to take care of those things. Now, my mother's old school, but she's not wrong. We see those imbalances in a lot of metrics, and not just in terms of who does more housework, childcare, or support work. No, according to collected data, women have overall more personality than men. Wait, what? Okay, that was kind of a joke, but you're paying attention now, aren't you? I'm referring to a commonly used personality test that I don't subscribe to, but a lot of businesses do. It's called the Big 5 Personality Trait Test. Now, the Big 5 traits are openness to new experiences, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And women score higher than men on many facets of openness, agreeableness, and neuroticism except for the anger marker. And then there's no consistent difference between men and women in conscientiousness and extroversion, because the theory is gendered socialization differs on those points across cultures. There's even some literature about how terms like bossy and domineering repress women's outcomes regarding extroversion in particular. Now, like I said, I'm not a fan of the Big 5 because it doesn't just measure traits. It says which traits are more desirable than others. It makes neuroticism and introversion sound like character defects, which leads to the idea that depression and anxiety are moral failings instead of mental wellness challenges. Instead of encouraging balance, the Big 5 metrics insist that more open, conscientious, extroverted, and agreeable you are, the better. And it says neuroticism is always bad. And that's not true. Someone who's constantly on about the next big thing can lean towards recklessness. Someone who's too conscientious may struggle to make decisions in a clutch. And everyone finds that person in the office who always wants to chant because they're that big an extrovert to be too much sometimes. But you'll notice that women are higher in 3 of the Big 5, and even with men in the remaining 2, which is why I joke that women just have more personality than men do. See where I went with that joke? Okay, maybe not funny. No surprise, the personality trait that's most consistently higher in women is agreeableness. And one of the theories is it's because men can get away with being jerks way more often than women. There's a difference between someone likes and someone will allow. It's a version of my, top 10 phrase. People don't have to like your boundaries, but they do have to respect them. Culturally, people don't like a lot of things they think they need to eat. And that's why boundaries are important. And that gets lost in a lot of these conversations. It's just fact, guys, that somebody may grief you on being a closed off, unreliable grouch, but they usually don't cut you off for that without it being an extended period where it just wears them down. That is not the same as what women deal with more often, which is being socially ostracized or even fired, in some cases for simply not smiling enough. Is it any wonder that women measure as more agreeable than men? The grouches of the world, and sometimes I am one. I am low in agreeableness, but some of my fellow grouches love to throw around the statistic that less agreeableness correlates to higher incomes, but correlation isn't causation. When you're the boss, you don't have to kiss the boss's tuchus. And the boss always makes significantly more money than the boss's employees. Like I said, correlation is not causation. Now, these imbalances aren't helping anyone. People who are too nice sacrifice their ambitions and happiness to minimize conflict. And I think everyone, even those of us that can handle a certain amount of aggression, are sick of cutthroat cultures where you're expected to stab your coworkers in the back to get ahead. But as much as I've talked about those gendered expectations, I think it might be worst for the people who don't conform to those gendered stereotypes and racial stereotypes and job stereotypes and the neurodivergent. I had a discussion this week with a young woman studying to be a vet who's absolutely beside herself because she doesn't understand the subtleties of how groups of women communicate. She's had the bad experience of just being cut off and not knowing why, because most of her colleagues are women and she's worried it'll happen again. And that's the problem with people pleasing. Eventually you start going the kind of crazy that hurts you because you think your destiny hinges solely on the opinions of others. That becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because you don't form bonds with people who will tell you what's wrong, engage in healthy conflicts, and work together towards goals. You end up stuck in gossipy cesspools on planet frenemy. There's no simple test to know when it's good to be liked and when it's the right call to be unpopular. All actions have consequences, it's true, but you can't spend your life constantly seeking external approval. Because sometimes, no matter how hard you try, everyone will turn on you and make you the target. It's happened to me multiple times. Now, here's the thing. Here's why I say healthy goals are based on things you can control. That doesn't mean you're wrong. And it certainly doesn't mean you're bad, even if you were wrong. Healthy groups of adults don't gang up on someone. Now, despite knowing that, it still feels really bad to be on the receiving end of that treatment. And it's understandable that you wouldn't want to repeat. That's why learning to set those boundaries is so important. And this week's guest is going to help us do that. When we come back on It's Not Therapy, clinical psychologist Liana will be here with her personal story of overcoming people-pleasing and her tips for you to find balance. If you have a question based on what you hear, give me a call, 289-275-9600, 289-275-9600, Liana at nottherapyshow.com, or send it in via the contact form on nottherapyshow.com or at nottherapy on Twitter and Instagram. Be back with the interview after this. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kursor. I'm still not a therapist. And it is time once again for the interview, a lot of people's favorite part of the show. And I have a great guest this week. Now, Liana is with us. She's a clinical psychologist, co-author of Act Daily Journal, and the host of the podcast, Your Life in Process. But Liana, you have a lot going on, and I know I missed a bunch. So what are some of the other things that you do?
Well, I really have a passion about bringing sort of what's been in the halls of psychology buildings and not in the lives of people to life. So what I like to do is learn about research and bring it to the general public, but bring it to the general public in a way that is accessible and applicable. One of the ways that I do that is through an annual summit. So I have From Striving to Thriving Summit. I'm really interested in shifting our ideas around productivity and how to be more compassionate and more aligned with our values when we put energy out into the world. So that's the From Striving to Thriving Summit, which is hosted by me, but it has a lot of leaders in the field, people like Rick Hansen and Jack Kornfield and Jennifer Shepard-Payne, and just folks that are doing good things out there. So that's something I'm pretty passionate about right now, in addition to just being a therapist and a parent and, being a human in this world.
Now, you're here to talk to us this week about people pleasing. And the thing I
Yes.
like about your approach is you don't put a moral judgment on it that this is bad, this is good. Your take on it is that you can be a people pleaser as long as you do it flexibly. And the thing I like about this is because there's that, big five personality agreeableness
Yeah.
thing that I, especially for a woman, rank really naturally low in. And so, I'm an INFJ and the Myers-Briggs. And so I have to be more of a people pleaser. And so I'm living proof that it is not a bad thing as long as it's done in, I say moderation, but you say do it flexibly, right?
Yes.
What's the difference between moderate and flexible?
Well, there's two things that I would say to focus on. One is volume control, and you being the controller of the volume of it. So you just mentioned you may be lower on agreeableness,
Mm-hmm.
but there may be some situations, contexts, circumstances where you need to turn up the volume of agreeableness, and it would benefit you. So some people that are people pleasers, they need to turn down their people pleasing in certain situations. They need to set limits, set boundaries, check in with themselves, not override their needs for other people's needs. And that volume control has a second component of flexibility because it's flexible to respond to what your values are. So instead of automatically people pleasing, just sort of having that be your habit, we can get in the habit of people that say
Mm-hmm.
yes to everything, or in the habit of always not listening to your body and listening to someone else, their needs first. You stop and almost put like a speed bump in where you slow yourself down and you check in and you ask yourself, is this in line with my values of how I want to be in the world, of what I care about? And if it is, then you can turn up the volume flexibly of your people pleasing. And if it's not, then you turn it down. So flexibility is actually one of the key factors that we're finding in sort of psychological skills that really help you thrive in the world. Being able to be more flexible means that you can adapt as the world changes, and it's constantly changing. If we haven't realized that yet, it's
Mm-hmm.
whether you like it or not, it's changing, and it may be changing for the better or changing for the worse. But if you can be flexible, you're more likely to help it kind of move
Mm-hmm.
towards the better. And flexibility is also really helpful when we're thinking about things like our thoughts, not getting so rigid or obsessive or stuck in our thoughts. It's really helpful when we're thinking about our emotions. So being able to flexibly respond to strong emotions and difficult emotions, as opposed to trying to always control them or being rigid around them, and then being flexible in our behavior as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that saved me because, well, my agreeableness is low, my openness to new experiences is
There
way
you go.
out there. And so I'm like, okay, this isn't being nice because that immediately trips one of those, as you said, early childhood traumas in my head. Not early childhood, but early life traumas. So it's like it's not people pleasing, it's not being nice, it's trying something new. And to me, that helps me get in the right frame of it. So I don't feel like I'm being pushed around. I don't have those, rigid boundaries as opposed to porous boundaries
Mm-hmm.
that they talk about. And I wonder, because people struggle with boundaries to begin with. It's almost like an epidemic of modern life, the lack of healthy boundaries. People either have boundaries that are way too rigid and what I call spiky,
Mm-hmm.
or instead of the speed bump, it's the severe tire damage, right? And or they have no boundaries at all or incredibly weak boundaries. And that I find in both cases is rooted in a fear of abandonment or a trauma from abandonment or neglect. And you
Mm-hmm.
get into the sort of attachment styles in your article and expectations going forward. I wonder if you could speak to that and how that informs both inflexible people and then people pleasing.
Absolutely. So develop people pleasing as a behavior. And I would say, oftentimes we want to say, like, I am a people pleaser or I am not a people pleaser. And a behavioral psychologist would actually say, well, actually, no, sometimes, and it's more behavior that you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
why do we develop behaviors? We develop certain types of behaviors because we may have a temperament, like those personality features that you were
mm-hmm,
talking
mm-hmm.
about. But we also develop behaviors because they served us in some way.
Mm-hmm.
If you were punished as a child, or you learned you wouldn't be punished if you were a people pleaser, or maybe you were very praised. I often tell the story that if you see me on a video, like if you go to YouTube and watch a video of me, my head is always slightly tilted to one side, because I think as a child, people thought that it was cute. I would smile and it was sort of pleasing. So I'm the opposite of you. If I have a tendency to default to people pleasing, and I've had to dial it back. So we learn from our early childhood experiences, our attachment styles, we get reinforced for doing certain types of behaviors, or we learn that if we use these behaviors, we can avoid uncomfortable emotions. So I don't have to face conflict. I don't have to set the boundary if I just say yes, or I just do what people are saying. Or the opposite, if I have a really rigid boundary, I don't have to enter into that discomfort of being in a place of like having a compromise with someone,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So we learn these skills over time for different reasons, but they may not be workable for
Mm-hmm.
us anymore. I'm more interested in flexible boundaries, and this concept of flexibility goes to everything, including our boundaries, because in one moment with one person in this context, a certain boundary will fit for me.
Mm-hmm.
And in another context, it won't. And so I need to be the decider of where I put the boundary. And I need to be able to be skillful enough to shift the boundary based on the context, also based on how I'm doing. You know, maybe I'm having a day where I have less energy, or didn't get a good night's sleep, or whatever's happening in my life, where I may not be able to put other people's needs first. But I really, for me, as having a tendency towards people pleasing behaviors, I get kind of miffed when people tell me, don't be such a people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with perfectionism. Don't be such a perfectionist. Because actually, these are things that have been helpful for me in my
Mm-hmm.
life. And so it's more about being skillful with it than it is about just stop doing it in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that a lot of really good points there, because people do have natural tendencies. I've got a very good friend. She's much more of a girly girl than I am, and she is more of that sort of nurturing personality type, right? She has very different needs and very different preferences regarding her, her associations with people. And it always, as somebody who's not like that, and as somebody who's, oh well, this is cool, like people should be allowed to be different from me,
Mm-hmm.
people should be allowed to be their authentic selves. And if somebody likes doing nice things for people, that shouldn't be vilified or treated as weak or bad. It comes down to, are they doing it and enjoying it? Or there's this resentment cycle that builds, right? That somebody does a nice thing, doesn't get appreciated for it, gets frustrated, starts getting, I find some people, they expect a lot of mind reading, like mind reading and people pleasing tend to go hand in
Mm-hmm.
hand. And it's that thing you talk about flexibility. Now, as somebody who comes from being overly people pleasing, how did you start that journey to not wear yourself out, to manage your energy? And because I imagine those first few steps were completely terrifying.
Yeah. Well, the saying, research is me search. Well,
Mm-hmm.
there's this other one, which is my mess is my message. And I think that's what's helpful for me, is I actually became burned out. I mean, as a therapist, if you don't have really good, healthy boundaries, and I would say they're flexible boundaries, because there's some clients that I will end my session at 50 minutes on the dot.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other clients, I'll be a little more loose with, we'll go up to the end, because I know they're not going to push that boundary. Right. So I learned
Right.
the hard way that I do need to have boundaries. I do need to have practices where I'm taking breaks from my work. I mean, I just basically got burned out as a
Mm-hmm.
therapist, as many people are feeling burned out right now. And burnout has to do with not only the individual, but also, again, the context of
Yeah.
what we're in. But in learning how to be in the type of work that I'm in, and again, this is where people pleasing is a skill, because it's important for me as a therapist to form relationships and to be agreeable and
Mm-hmm.
to be warm. You want to come to my office because I'm going to be validating and
Mm-hmm.
caring
Mm-hmm.
and all those things. And it's also important as a therapist and I would say as a parent and partner and friend, and all these different relationships that we are in, to be able to have like limits and to say, you know what? No, I can't fit you in next week. Or no, I'm not going to work I'm not going to work your appointment around your Pilates schedule. Sorry. These are the times that I have available. So that's where I think just sort of trial and error. And then I see that it benefits my clients as well, because when I'm modeling flexible, healthy boundaries and I'm checking in with myself and I'm saying, does this line up with my values? It's sort of like almost like a choice point. If I'm, am I turning right to go towards my values, or if I'm turning left and it's people pleasing and it's not towards my values, then I know that I need to make an adjustment there. And it's helpful for my clients for me to model that.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I love that you said about not going to time on everybody. If, somebody respects your time, you respect theirs, you give them that little bit extra. And I think that actually rewards positive behavior. Now, some people who people please have trouble connecting to their core values because they're people pleasing, as you said, a survival trait. How did you find that was a problem for you, and how did you connect? Because we talk about core values on the show a lot. One of my top 10 phrases is core values are more important to relationships than common interests. How did you figure out what those core values were so you could steer your ship accordingly?
Well, core values for me, and these are actually part of the type of therapy I do, which is sort of a sister to DBT. You talked about DBT. It's a type of therapy called ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy. One of the big modules in DBT and in ACT is about values. And core values have to do with what is it that you care about? Who do you want to be in the world? Looking back over your life, what would you say stood out as meaningful to you? Going to bed at night. When you go to bed and you, instead of worrying about what's going to happen the next day, look back over your day and ask yourself, what was meaningful about today? Where did I show up like the type of person I want to show up in the world? And all of those things kind of collectively gather into a pool of, these are my values. These are the things that are important to me. Yesterday, it was the end of the day. It's like Sunday. So I had all this stuff to do to get to Monday, including writing some notes. And my kid comes up to me and says, do you want to play chess? And it was one of those moments where the choice point, which is what is real. When I look back on my life and this day, what is going to be more important to me? And it was more important to me to sit down with him and play a game of chess and have a little anxiety about not getting stuff done. Right. So that wasn't a people pleasing mood, like, oh, he'll like me better if I play chess with him. It was a values based mood of what really is most important to me in this moment. And that it comes from sort of pausing and checking in and asking yourself, what's most important right now? And what do I want my life to be about?
I like that. Right before you go to bed, think back instead of worrying about forwarding. That's really, really good advice for sort of a mindfulness slowdown. All right, we'll be back with more with Liana Hill, clinical psychologist, after the break. We got to pause, but I want to hear more. Give us a few minutes on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy, talking to clinical psychologist Liana Hill about people pleasing. When was the first time you set a boundary like that, you didn't people please, and it felt good instead of yuck?
I don't know about the first time because that's hard to remember, but I can tell you about a recent time where I had my practice is super full. It's coming up on the holidays. It's just going to get fuller. The thing about therapists is they get busier over the holidays. Because everyone's seeing their family and they're like, I need to talk to my therapist.
The summer I could shoot a camera through a Canon through my schedule, and now it's like there is no availability anywhere.
There's no availability, and then everyone's relapsing, so it's just like a good time to be a therapist. So I'm envisioning that, and I had a client contact me that had like an in because they knew someone that knows me, and they kept on going at it, like trying to get at me in every single different angle to try and get into my practice. And I just repeatedly said, nope, doesn't work for me. I'll reach out to you in the new year. Nope. And then finally I said, no, it doesn't work for me. Now you can reach out to me in the new year because it's not even on my plate anymore. And it felt so good to set the limit. And this was someone that wasn't in a crisis, that just wanted to kind of come in and talk about things. They weren't like, needing therapy right this minute, but it felt so good to get clear on, I need to be available for my current, what's on my plate right now. And I also need to be available to myself, and I see what's coming ahead. And in order to do that, I need to say no to this thing and not feel guilty about that, because I know that I'm intraconnected. I'm interconnected. So I know that when I set limits that are workable for me, it benefits those around me, because I can show up in a more like grounded, present way, that when I'm offering something to someone, it's a true offering. It's like, I have this to give you, as opposed to I'm like draining myself to give this to you. And I do think that feels different for folks.
Yeah. I mean, that was the thing I had to perspective take with people who had that higher agreeableness score than me. Because for me, it was just like, nope, because if I overextend myself, it's not fair to anybody. That was innate. That was something I just understood for various reasons. And it was like, no, I'm not going to agree to something I don't think I can do 100%. Right. But to understand that people just didn't want to say no, because they very much wanted to be there for everybody and do all the things. And I guess, is it that people don't think forward about whether they can? Is it an energy of spoons management kind of thing, to use that vernacular? What is it that causes people to overcommit?
I think it also has to do with worth.
Okay.
And I think that sometimes we put our worth in what we do, and what people think about us, like that if I keep other people happy, then I'm okay. Or if other people are happy with me, then I'm a good person. So we avoid letting people down. We don't like the discomfort of someone being disappointed. We also may put our worth in what we do, as opposed to just our inherent worth as humans on this planet, that you are worthy. You don't have to do anything to be worthy. And so that is another thing that kind of almost gets reinforcing of that, because if I do something and I get praised, and I feel like I'm a good person, and then as soon as I don't feel like a good person anymore, then I better do something to get more praise to feel like I'm a good person. And that can be a vicious cycle that keeps you stuck in doing whatever you're doing, whether it's people that, get all hooked into likes and, that kind of thing in social media, or it's in, people pleasing people in your life. So ultimately, at the root of it is, I think, kind of separating those two out. That if I'm engaging in people pleasing behavior, I'm doing so because it's lined up with my values, the type of person that I want to be in the world. It's a benefit to them and of benefit to me. It's that mutual, synergistic, interconnected deal. And I can also choose not to people please. And even when I choose not to do that, I'm still worthy. I still have worth as a human. My worth is not based on what I do.
I'm going to throw a difficult question at you, because I'm a difficult person. When you do decide to overextend consciously, because it is in line with your core values, how do you prevent that sort of panic that a lot of people feel afraid they're backsliding?
Yeah. Well, it's how you overextend.
Okay.
So are you overextending with self-compassion and holding your hand along the way and saying, yeah, this is a push. This is a big push right now. There's more on my plate right now. It's not going to always be this way. And how are you talking to yourself while you're doing it? Are you using words that are encouraging and warm and caring, like a coach that's saying, okay, this is your, last 3 miles of this marathon, or last 3 minutes of the game. Let's put everything into it. Or are you being harsh and judgmental and criticizing yourself along the way? And that makes a big difference when you overextend. So if you overextend, it's okay. Everyone's going to overextend from time to time. I do. We all do. It's normal. It's how do we show up for ourselves in that time? And then also, how do we take care of ourselves after the overextension? So when I have a big holiday, whatever push with a lot of clients, am I also making sure that in January, which is I do every January, I take a week retreat and it's completely off when everyone else is off, or are you taking your lunch break in the day where you really sit down and let yourself eat a lunch and then the rest of your day can be overpacked. So there's an element of that, which is really caring for yourself along the ride.
Yeah. I mean, that involves getting to know yourself really well. And I want to give you a chance to talk about, because acceptance commitment therapy is one of those ones that people don't hear about. I mean, I think it's actually lesser known than dialectical behavior therapy. They're treated as subsections of CBT, but CBT is like this big spider web catch-all. And it's like, what is it? So what, for people curious, for people like, oh, what is this thing she's talking about? This sounds like it might be a good fit for me. What is acceptance commitment therapy?
Well, I'm so excited about both. So I started out in DBT, as we were talking. My early research, my dissertation was on DBT, and I studied DBT for eating disorders. And what I found about DBT, I love it. It's really skills-based. And for some folks, it's like a sledgehammer. There's like so much, right? The manual itself, you like don't want to lug it around from office to office because it's so big. And ACT is really, I would say, a sister to DBT. It's also an acceptance-based approach that incorporates behavioral science and also incorporates a lot of sort of this contemplative wisdom, if you like some of that stuff. It's a cognitive behavioral therapy. What's different about it is it's a little bit, it's based on these sort of 6 core components that build your psychological flexibility, your ability to stay present, aligned, do what you care about in the world, even when obstacles arise. And it doesn't have as much of sort of like the bullet points and, manualized approach as DBT does. It's a little bit more, I would say a little bit more fluid than DBT. A big core component of ACT is values work. And values work as sort of like, what does it actually mean to live your values right now? Like right now, if you check in with yourself, what's most important to you in this moment, the type of person you want to be, type of daughter, son, brother, person on this planet, what would be the next move you'd take? And building those small kind of like daily habits of living your values so that you grow a life that is aligned with the type of person you want to be in the world, what's meaningful and purposeful to you. It has a little bit less focus on emotion regulation compared to DBT. So it's now being used with Olympic athletes. It's being used with chess, actually. It's used a lot with anxiety, insomnia, substance use, all sort of things, behavior change, weight loss. But it has this whole angle of growing a values-based life.
Oh, interesting. That's a good way of separating the distinction. That's awesome. So when you talk about acceptance, because I'm asking this for one particular client who wants to try acceptance commitment therapy. One person is getting personal attention right now, and they're like, what is he is on the spectrum. He's on the autism spectrum, and the idea of the abstract of acceptance confounds him. What does it mean to accept? What does it mean to just move on, to get closure to these big abstract concepts? What does it mean to accept another person's self-declared identity, all that stuff? What does it mean to accept?
So in ACT, when we talk about acceptance, we are actually talking about acceptance of stuff that shows up under your skin. And you don't have to like something to accept it. Something that Marcia would often say, like, you don't have to like it to accept it. You don't have to approve of it to accept it. And actually accepting it allows you to change it, right? So, but in ACT, when we talk about accepting stuff that comes up under your skin, what's interesting is that there's a paradox. The more that you fight an emotion, the stronger the emotion will get. The more you try and not think a thought, the more likely you're actually going to have that thought. This is what people with OCD struggle with, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to think about how dirty that handle is. And all I can think about is how dirty the handle is.
The whole neurodivergent spectrum. This is a huge challenge.
Yes. And unfortunately, a lot of our messaging, sociocultural messaging has been like, don't think that, don't feel that. and like you can't. Steve Hayes, who's the founder of ACT, the co-founder of ACT, says you don't have delete buttons in your brain.
Yeah, I think that's the reason that song from Frozen took off, because that's what it's about. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So acceptance. What is acceptance? Acceptance means, can I loosen up my grip a little bit? You know, Marsha Linehan's, if you hold out your hands and you were to imagine them full of sand, and you were to turn them over and hold them tight, right? You have to have a strong grip to hold that sand inside your fists, right? Acceptance is turning those hands over the other way, opening your palms and letting the sand be there. So the sand could be the anxiety that you feel in going to a party. It could be the anger that you feel towards your family member. It could be the thoughts that you have about yourself that are critical. So you're not holding and gripping them or trying to get rid of them or contain them, but rather you're opening to them, allowing them to be there, so that eventually you could use your hands for some other things in life, things that are important to you. Non-acceptance uses up a lot of energy, and it often rebounds, giving you the very thing that you don't want tenfold.
Yep, that's true. Great place to stop. Diana Hill, PhD, clinical psychologist, co-author of ACT Daily Journal, host of the podcast Your Life in Process. And what's the name of your seminar again, Diana? I should have written
From Striving to Thriving.
Striving to Thriving Summit. That's right. Diana, how can people follow you, stay in touch with what you're doing, find out about what you've got going on? What's your contact information?
You can find me at drdianahill.com. That's a great place to find all those resources, and on Instagram at Dr. Diana Hill. I post a lot there.
Diana, thanks so much for accepting this interview.
Thank you. It was a delight talking with you.
All right. When we come back, more tips on how to find balance, how to people please smart, and maybe when to do it and when not to do it. I don't know. We'll see how much time we have. I have to please the clock. Back in a bit. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. And in these final moments of the show, I want to talk about core values and why it's sometimes okay to not people please even when it goes bad. I talked off the top about how I see the value in people pleasing, but I struggle with it. I didn't say that as a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. That's the acceptance that Diana was talking about. Now that acceptance tells me a lot about my core values. A core value of mine is integrity, behaving with honor. I'd rather be honest than popular, and I believe in doing the hard thing for the right reasons. Now, like I said, that gets me into trouble sometimes. A lot of the time. But it's good trouble. It's better for me to be in trouble externally instead of being in trouble internally. Core values keep the core of who you are strong. They make you, you, more than any other identifier you can label yourself as. When a group of people share significant core values, they can overcome any mere difference of opinion, perspective, or culture. For instance, I have some friends who are far bigger on name calling and disputes than I am, but they never start the name calling. They always wait for the other party to take the first shot. So even though I don't handle things the same way, I respect that the reciprocal disrespect is their way of setting a boundary. The theory goes that people can't expect better treatment than they put into the world. Granted, I'm not a big fan of they started it thinking either, but the common understanding that you don't have to respect a person who shows no respect is the grounds for negotiation on where the different lines are. There's a big difference between not thinking something is the best tactic in a given situation and thinking something is morally wrong. Self-compassion allows us to recognize we're not perfect and accordingly to give other people space to be imperfect as well. But imperfections don't mean that we should look the other way when someone's doing something we think is actively wrong. What kind of friend or colleague would we be if we just let someone make an ass of themselves? Well, I learned the hard way that some people want that. They want people to back them 100% even when they're going down the wrong path. They believe that's true support. And I just don't agree. That's a fundamental difference in core values. If you push back on a friend, it gives them a chance to pull back before they go past the point of no return. And sometimes the person on the receiving end of someone succumbing to brain worms feels less of a sting when it's clear that there's pushback on, we'll say, an opinion forcefully communicated. Now, is that friend or loved one gonna be thrilled with me in that moment? No, I mean, they're probably not even thinking straight. But I'd rather they be angry at me than just letting them cross a line that'll cause them reputational or financial harm. And, some lines deserve that consequence. To me, a real friend tells you respectfully and with sincere caring when they think you're going about something the wrong way. That to me tells me that they're invested. On the flip side, a real friend also listens to well-meaning cautions. They may end up not agreeing and proceeding on the original path, but the fact that they took a moment to listen and understand the difference in perspective means that they give a damn about my point of view. That, to me, is an example of people unpleasing that strengthens relationships. There are better and worse ways to tell someone they're making a mess of things, but some of the best lessons tend to be the ones that sting a little, so the consequences of the alternative don't sting a lot. Demanding that everyone be nice all the time is bad happy math. You're demanding that people cater to you instead of being authentic. Being nice all the time is also bad happy math, because sometimes when you're being nice, you're not being fair. You're taking the path of least resistance, and you may be catering to a bully at the expense of everyone else. Remember, you're the hero of your own story and not anyone else's. And we're coming up on the end of our story for this week. Next week, we're going to handling that sting. We're going to talk handling rejection. And I have a very, very special guest next episode. Someone who has been on Star Wars is going to join me to talk about how acting has taught them to deal with rejection. Until then, your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Have a great week.